but my notes are in order. All right, well, first I want to start by welcoming. Am I okay to start, Stefania? I just realized. Okay.
We have people coming in, so you can chit chat a little bit while we're waiting.
Okay. So just welcoming everyone into a practical guide to self-care and self-compassion. So I know we're scheduled to start right about now, but we're just going to give folks some time to come into the room, get gathered. If you like logged on, I did a happy dance because my notes were out of order and now they're mostly back in order. So just looking forward. And if you're watching the recording, thanks so much for making the time to watch this recording as well. And maybe once you kind of see a slowdown of people joining in, then we can kind of do our official start.
Yeah, I think we're good to go. There's been a little bit of a lull.
Perfect. I just wanted to take a drink. So I'm just going to do that again in case there is someone who's an editing wizard and can cut out that awkward bit. So welcome everyone. Thank you for making the time to join us either right now in present time or in the recording for About Face's webinar on a practical guide to self-care and self-compassion. My name is Colleen Wheatley. We're going to go through a few things and then we will be introducing myself in more details along with other members of our panel who are to see in the screen along with the PowerPoint presentation. So first I'm going to hand it over to Stefania.
Awesome. AboutFace is committed to inclusion and diversity, and in keeping with Indigenous practices and building respectful relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples of Canada, we want to recognize the traditional territories or ancestral lands of the Indigenous people. Since we're doing this virtually, we'd like to recognize that the Indigenous people are the traditional keepers of the lands and waters where each of us are joining from. We also do this in the hopes that it inspires you to learn more about the land and the people who took care of this land long before we got here. And if you would like some more information about the land that you're on, you can text the number provided in the screen, 1-855-9175263, or you can check out native-land.ca. They have some really cool resources.
Thanks so much, Stefania, and thanks everybody for taking the time to do your own acknowledgement for wherever you are. So these are some people who are involved. So first I'll introduce myself. My name is Colleen Wheatley. If you're seeing, my pronouns are she, her. My background is I am a registered social worker. I have been a member of the facial difference community since I was a wee little child, and I actually have been lucky enough to be involved in AboutFace, both as a community member and as a staff member and as a volunteer for going on a couple decades. So when I talk about some of the different things here, I'm drawing on different things from my work as a social worker. So that's coming from different education, different trainings, and I'm grateful for other professionals who have shared some of their resources. And then I'm also using my personal experience as well as from other folks in the facial difference community who have shared their experiences with myself as well. So that's a little bit about me. Now I'm going to introduce another staff member from AboutFace, Stefania, and I really do appreciate, I really enjoy working with Stefania, and I absolutely do consider her an ally to the facial difference community.
Hi, I'm Stefania. I use she, her pronouns as well. I'm the program manager for AboutFace for the child, youth, and family programs. So that includes any children programming, psychosocial resources, coordinating webinars like this with Colleen, and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Thanks. And then Morgan, if you can introduce yourself. And Morgan's name is on the PowerPoint, but if your Zoom is on the default like mine, you might just have to move it around so that you can see, because there are the words there. Just right now, my head is blocking it. So apologies, Morgan.
No worries. So hello, everybody. My name is Morgan Lacusta. I come to you from Calgary, Alberta. I'm an employment service coordinator for a non-for-profit here in the city called Women in Need Society, where we give vulnerable populations the opportunity to gain meaningful employment for themselves. I've been with AboutFace for, I want to say, almost 4 years now. I was born with a facial difference, but didn't know until later on in life. And I had the opportunity to find out about FACE when I was in my early young adult. So I'm very excited to be here. Happy to talk about this amazing topic with some amazing ladies. And thank you. On to Christina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christine Dela Cruz. I am I'm an Ontario certified teacher in 2 boards, so in the Toronto District School Board and also in the York Region District School Board. And I specialize in primary junior education, and currently I'm getting my qualifications for special ed as well. I have been with AboutFace for many, many years, ever since I was very young, and I have been both a participant in the programming and camps, as well as a regular volunteer currently and helping out where I can. And I'm very excited to be chatting with all of you and to listen to all of your ideas about how you like to manage your self-care as well.
Thanks so much. And I think this is a great example of, as we were planning, and I know that it is very challenging for people to be able to set aside time for this kind of work. So, gathering other folks with their own experience and expertise, and then using a skill that we should touch later on is when we saw people signing up, and I got to have the privilege of getting nervous about people actually attending in person. So it's really great to have folks here as well. And then hopefully we can have some starts of conversation as much as we can in a virtual setting.
Just a couple of housekeeping things before we move on. You'll notice if you've never been in the webinar space of Zoom before, only the panelists and the host videos are being shown. So we will be the ones on camera and talking all the time. If you have a question that you would like to ask us, there is a feature at the bottom, depending on the device that you're using, called Q&A. If you have a question, please ask the question there. We're going to reserve the chat for participation in the seminar. So there might be times in the webinar, so there might be times where we ask for ideas or ways that you use self-care. And the chat will be the space for that. We just don't want any questions that you have to get caught up in the stream of things that are coming in from the chat. And lastly, we cannot provide any specific advice or counseling, any specific personal questions that you have about self-care. We would ask you to direct those to your healthcare team and your healthcare providers. If you need help searching for help in terms of counseling or all of that, we're happy to direct you to some online resources for that.
So the goals of this presentation are to discuss the roots of self-care and also discuss concepts of self-care, positive psychology, and self-compassion. Okay, and also doing this using the lens of the facial difference community. So that includes people who have a facial difference themselves, family members, and allies as well. So first thing that I want to talk about is I want to acknowledge what some of us are experiencing at this point in time. And I use this metaphor, which I've learned from Kevin Cameron, who, as you can see by how many letters are behind his name, he's quite educated, he's considered an expert, and he does do a lot of work in Canada and actually internationally around trauma. He is a Canadian and East Coaster living in Alberta, so he does have a very specific way of talking. So if I fall into that dialect, it's just because I'm really channeling his expression and the way he talked about this. And so he talked about this a year ago. So this was when we were kind of a year into the Canadian experience of the current pandemic and what we're all experiencing. And, you know, I know we've talked as a group where, you know, there are just things where life can be a little harder, you know, as someone who used to commute for over an hour a day and who used to have like all of these extracurriculars and even a social life where I met with people in person and moved around and maybe even traveled, finding that I'm not able to be as productive as I used to be. And, you know, really not understanding why, you know, and little things like even I moved into a new home. I'm coming up to now a year. And like, I really thought that more boxes would be put away and I'd have more than 2 things put up on my walls. But here I am. And this is kind of an explanation. So the way Kevin Cameron talks about it is he's like, okay, so, you know, you're going to work in a big fancy pickup truck. I'm not going to get into different brands. But you know, the souped up pickup truck and you're driving, you've got a big presentation, you've got supplies in the back and you're hitting the road. He also has a style where he sometimes says, and you're freaking hitting the road and you've got all your stuff going with you. And here you are, you're going and your truck breaks down at the side of the road, which can happen for lots of different reasons. And, you know, but you've given yourself maybe like an hour. So you still have a bit of time, but you're not going to get there in your truck. But you look up and you look up and you look across the road and there is a rickshaw and you think, all right, I guess I'm going to freaking pull the rickshaw and that's how I'm going to get there to my job to do the presentation. So you start loading up the rickshaw, but it turns out you can't fit everything that you can fit in the back of your truck in the rickshaw. So you're doing as much as you can. And then you're like, all right, I'm still going to do this. I'm going to go. So you start pulling that rickshaw. You start off at a run. Maybe you hit some hills, you slow down. Maybe there's a bit of rain. You show up, you essentially show up 3 hours late. You show because you were pulling a rickshaw. You can't go as fast as you were in your truck. You show up late. Some of the materials that, you know, you did put in the rickshaw have now fallen out. Maybe they've gotten wet. You're probably not as fresh as you would have been had you been driving your car. So you're a bit disheveled. You show up wet. You show up sweaty, you don't have your things. And I mean, really the presentation time is kind of gone. And that's because using a trauma lens, we have this collective experience. We're pulling rickshaws. So, you know, if you're wondering why you can't function, you can't perform at the same level that you could a year ago, it actually, like, psychologically, that actually makes sense. And I mean, I haven't had any contact with him in the last year, but part of me wonders if, like, it's maybe some days mine feels like it's been downgraded to like a rusty tricycle these days when I just could not do the work that I used to. So I always just want to acknowledge and give ourselves permission for when, you know, you're sitting there and you're going, why can't I do what I used to? We're pulling rickshaws right now. And I think it's important to give ourselves permission to recognize, and also we're not alone. We're going to talk a little bit about that collective experience and how important that is for all of us. But recognizing that, you know, this is a traumatic experience and we are talking a lot about the trauma, but one thing is, and this was another thing that Kevin Cameron has brought up too, is we talk about collective trauma. That also means that there's collective resiliency as well. So there is recovery. There are some strengths in this experience. So just to be aware and kind of using that lens as we talk about some of these things, like there's no amount of self-care and self-compassion that is going to turn a rickshaw into being as fast, as strong, as like protective in the weather as a truck. So just kind of putting that out there, which brings us actually to this next slide, which is beware of self-care as a weapon. Sometimes it can feel like, well, you just need to take better care of yourself. And it can feel like it's our fault, but really, we also need to recognize that there are times people don't need to be better at self-care. Systems need to be better at change. And I think I want to really recognize this lens, especially with the lens of the facial difference community. There is not a magic self-care, self-compassion, positive psychology. This does not cure the discrimination that we face in the communities around us. Okay, so it's just, I want to really acknowledge these are tools that can be used to build resilience, to maintain some of our positive mental health. These are absolutely tools that should be used, but I am aware this is not something that's going to cure everything that's in the world around us. So I'm not sure if folks can read that, but I believe that the level of what is being called burnout says a lot more about our society collectively than it says about us as counselors individually. So it's not in our heads, in ourselves, but in the real world out there, there's a lack of justice. The people we work with, it's not that we're causing everyone else to burn out around us. There's so much around us, and we can rely on others to challenge us and inspire us. And we're being resistant, and we will talk a little bit about how self-care is actually being resistance to some of the systemic challenges that are out there. So just want to be clear about the reality of what's going on out there for all of us. So this is kind of a classic, why does self-care matter? I often do use, I do use the can't pour from an empty cup. I do like using the oxygen mask on airplanes. I'm sure many people are not flying as much as they used to. But I find in my experience, when I talk about this, I get 3 different answers. So I usually get, well, I put the mask on the child first because I'm taking care of the child beside me, when the oxygen mask falls down. And then the second is, I know that I have to put the mask on myself because if I pass out, then there's no one to take care of the child beside me. And then I find the most common answer I get is, Colleen, I know that I'm supposed to put the mask on myself so that I can be there to take care of the child, but I'm still going to put it on the child. That's what I'm going to do. So I just always recognize that. And, I've added in a little bit of a pop culture quote from RuPaul and kind of used it in that self-care lens, because essentially it's, if you can't take care of yourself, like, how are you going to take care of anybody else around you? And I think that really does put in perspective why it's important for us to treat ourselves with the same self-care and self-compassion that we use to take care of other people. So now, how is self-care portrayed? I find looking at all of these things, I find it kind of overwhelming. I find it kind of, there's like that Instagram self-care. It looks pretty. I put that good vibes on there because it's only positive. And I know that there's been more talk about this thing called toxic positivity, where it is kind of the removal of, well, there's nothing negative. And that's why we do talk about self-compassion doesn't remove the negative things in life. It's acknowledging it with nurturing and caring and understanding. One of the things I find is I struggle with kind of all of these messages, like the scheduling is, it means that if I don't do that, if I don't practice self-care, if I don't make the time to attend this webinar and watch it all in one go, then that means I'm failing myself and that I only have myself to blame if I'm experiencing fatigue or burnout and all of those things, which that's not fair and that's not right, but that's kind of what can happen a little bit here. And I think also self-care is not portrayed as work. It's kind of something frivolous, something you can do, and something that's easy. Like it should be easy just to like put sweatpants on and sit on the couch, but actually making the time to do that. And also if you're doing that and you're sitting on the couch and telling yourself, well, I'm lazy and I'm avoiding all of these things and you're putting yourself down, that's not really doing any self-care or self-compassion. So the worst part is it's not going to be effective. So you're spending the time, but then actually you're not helping yourself at all because you're thinking all of those negative pieces and all of those thoughts. So I just want to recognize, and also that it looks different for different people, I know like Stefania and I have talked about this, where it's like getting up in the morning and going for a run, right? That's something that she's done that has been helpful for that self-care. Whereas other people, it's giving permission to sleep in and saying, it's okay, I need my sleep. So those are just one example of how it can be different, and it can be different for other people, even within the same system, even within the same family. We cope with things differently. So just want to recognize that. Now, how can we apply this in the facial difference community? And I think when I think about this, I think that, you know, there is that piece where it's like, well, you just need to take care of yourself. Well, if you just need to take care of yourself, then all of the discrimination that you face can go away. Just worry about what other people say, just ignore it. All of those pieces. And I know myself, and I know from other people I've talked with, that can be quite frustrating. It can be invalidating. One thing that I discovered in prepping for this webinar is, though, it actually makes sense. So when people do that feedback of either saying, oh, well, this is what you should do. Oh, you're not feeling good. You should go to the gym, or you should eat healthier. And that's because one of the natural states of our brain is to do that problem solving mode, is to say, okay, I see, you know, I see there's a problem, I want to fix it. And I think that absolutely happens from family members, parents, siblings. Oh, I see my family member is hurting. I see that they're anxious about surgery, or they're anxious about meeting new friends or going to a new school. I want to fix it, because that's what I do. I want to fix it out of love. And you know, sometimes that's not actually helpful, or that's just we're skipping those first steps where we're validating. But I know myself as an individual, even just knowing this kind of helps me have that patience, for my self-compassion, but having that patience of understanding that that's actually a very normal response. That's our brain functioning as our brain is supposed to function, is it's that problem solving, and also a very black and white thinking. So it can be, oh, I see that someone I care about is struggling, so that means they must be depressed and sad, as opposed to, oh, they're having a hard time right now, but I know that, you know, they were having a good day before. Personally, I don't know what it is. I do have a sister. She's older, she's protective. I did learn recently that the song in, Louisa's song in El Canto, or Encanto, I always say it wrong, about being strong. Apparently she really identified it with that, right? Being strong, protecting her little sister with the facial difference. But I find still there are times if I call her and she's not expecting it, she goes, what's wrong? Because, and what's wrong? Something's wrong. And we've had this conversation where, and now I start saying, are you okay? Like, and I've had those conversations too, where I'm like, I am sad right now, but like, I'm okay. I just need to be able to be sad. And that black and white, thinking of her saying, well, either my sister is fine and she's okay, or I need to fix it, or she's sad and horrible. That's actually that natural state of black and white thinking. So a lot of these skills are actually, they're just retraining our brain. And luckily it turns out our brain is malleable, and we can kind of retrain our brain a little bit, which is kind of cool. So another thing in kind of relation to this taking care, this being positive, which we will be talking about positive psychology, is that it can feel like it means that we're removing all of the pain. And, it kind of makes me think of the movie Inside Out, where we learn that, you can't have joy, you need to have that sadness in there too. And I think sometimes we do run the course of, if we shut out those negative feelings, then it means we're shutting out those positive feelings as well. So that is a big part of self-care and self-compassion, is acknowledging those sad pieces, those challenging, those times when we might actually be hurting a little bit. And again, it takes time, it takes work, it takes practice. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of self-care, which rolls into self-compassion. So I do find it really interesting that, it did come from the medical model, where they were promoting, they were taking care of all the physical needs of patients, but they were finding that those patients weren't necessarily, so if they were in rehab, they weren't necessarily getting better. And I do find, using the lens of the facial difference community, I think, I also find it really interesting that if you kind of look at how the medical model has changed over time. So, I can see how this is related, you know, in that, okay, we fix the body. So like everything should be fine. We should be able to discharge this patient and go ahead. So we worry about all of the physical things and we worry about appearance later. And I think that this absolutely, and this is also a natural way of our brains doing that problem solving and compartmentalizing things. So I think this can happen for parents, right? You know, you have a newborn and there's something unexpected. Okay, I just want my child to be healthy. I just want them to be physically healthy, which is absolutely a valid hope and dream. You know, and you might also have other people in your community reiterating that. I know I've had these conversations with other folks too. If someone has had something, they've had an acquired physical difference or an acquired facial difference, and it's, well, okay, we just need to make sure that they're physically healthy and we'll deal with that later. And I think what happens is it just means later might not ever happen, you know, or it becomes something that's not really, it's not really talked about. And it's something that, you know, we don't really get to talk about and explore because, well, everyone's healthy, so it's fine. So everything's healthy. There's, you know, we don't need to go to those doctor's appointments, everything anymore. So everything's fine and everything's peachy, which sometimes it can be, but it really doesn't acknowledge those other pieces of our well-being. And then it actually, so at first, then it started being used as a tool to support stressful and traumatic jobs. And I think, you know, I think that list of stressful and traumatic jobs has really increased. And I would say, like, even kind of in my head, the names of jobs that I consider stressful and traumatic has really increased in the last couple of years. What's really interesting too is it's a political act, because women and people of color were recognizing that the medical model, which tends to be rooted in white patriarchy, was not meeting their needs. And so they were saying, you know what, we need to do something else. We need to do something to take care of ourselves. So there actually is some radical and political pieces involved in self-care and self-compassion. Then of course you can see, like, everything else, it's marketed. I know, like, right now it's February, so I'm seeing lots of things about self-love, all of these different things. And so absolutely it is marketed, and can be seen as trendy, as pretty, as nice, as an extra bonus. So you can see how it's evolved from being this radical political act to being, you know, something that seems like fluffy and pink and easy to do. So I really want to acknowledge kind of the roots of self-care, and that, you know, it actually came out from the Black Panthers as a way of staying resilient. So that's experiencing the repeated systemic oppression and interpersonal oppression and medical racism. And I think that really also, that does show, you know, different communities. And I do think it does include the facial difference community of needs not being met and saying, all right, I got to take care of this myself. And the other piece is really recognizing too that it's not selfish. A lot of times people think, oh, well, it must be nice if you've got the time to take a nice bath, or, oh, it must be nice to be able to take a walk. When really, again, we go back to some of those previous slides, and it's actually a very intentional act to be able to take care of those around us. So, you know, and having those conversations with other people, it is kind of really interesting to see how it can be twisted, but it actually is like a proactive and preventative measure, and it actually can decrease psychopathology. It has been shown to be effective, you know, working with different vets, soldiers, all of those different experiences. So then I think that piece can be transferred to other areas of life. And just acknowledging as well that there can be different experiences. I will reference her later, but Dr. Kristen Neff is kind of an expert in self-compassion, and she talks about difference in gender experience. So not that, you know, only one gender needs self-compassion more than others, but that, you know, there are different, and also various genders. There's not just two. That's just for folks to be aware of. But, you know, that some genders are expected to serve others more than themselves. And so then being aware that actually that's when we might need, and she calls this like fierce self-compassion. So we really need to fight to be able to take care of ourselves in order to be able to take care of others. I hope I'm not getting too overwhelming because there's a lot, but hopefully we can break these down. You don't need to remember all of these different things, but hopefully there can be a couple of pieces that you're able to apply to your daily life and practice. And again, really, you know, that it's not this performative, you know, self-coddling, and acknowledging, yes, this is hard work. The strategies that we will be talking about, it's not so much that I need you, that we're expecting that people need to carve out another 2 or 3 hours, but it's really, it's that old adage of saying like, let's do things, you know, smarter instead of harder. So it's just kind of twisting and tweaking things that you are probably already doing. So just kind of doing that twist and doing what we can in the same way that we would do all of these things to take care of our friends and people around us. What's really exciting though, as we discussed, is that, you know, we can build resilience. I know when I talk with families, you know, that's what we always want our kids. That's what we always want our other family members to have. We want them to build resilience. My simplest definition of resilience is being knocked back down, get back up. And I think of lyrics from Hamilton. You can describe it however you want. But what's really neat is it means that the more that we practice it, the easier it gets and the more effective it is. And I think what's also really neat is that, you know, we learn from others. So by role modeling, whether it's for other coworkers, whether it's for clients we work with, whether it's for family. And again, it's that, you know, it does get easier. So if you want it for other people in your life, if you want your children to build those resilience, then use that as that motivation to practice for yourself. And I think also, you know, a good way of seeing it, I think of, you know, when we think about learning a new skill, you know, snowboarding, and someone, you know, was saying, oh, I went snowboarding, but like I didn't fall down. So that was pretty good. And that's exactly what I would have said 5 years ago. I have now learned that actually falling means that I'm learning and I'm trying something new. So it is this weird kind of changing. We're actually looking at like celebrating, you know, those mistakes, learning. I have been trying out new phrases of, you know, when asking kids, how was your day at, you know, how was your day at school? Instead of asking, you know, or adding on, what did you learn? What was fun? It's, hey, did you make a mistake? You know, and practicing in a weird way, kind of like celebrating those mistakes. I often joke that, you know, I'm pretty smart because I learned through my mistakes, and like, so I am super, super smart because I've made many mistakes that I've been able to learn from. And again, it's building almost like that resilience muscle in our brain. And again, building that resilience muscle, building this self-care and self-compassion. Challenges of self-care. I think the biggest one we always have is time. There's only so much time in the day. And prioritizing importance. Again, we go back to that model, the medical model of prioritizing, you know, well, we have food, water, shelter. So there we go, right? And so prioritizing that this is something that actually is important. And again, I think that it's unique for different people, you know, so it works for one person or even on a different day, like some days sleeping in is a good practice of self-care and compassion for me. Other days, it's not so effective, because also if I'm spending the whole time saying, oh, I need to get up, I need to get up, I'm not actually getting any sleep or rest. I think I find like the most concrete example is kind of around food. There's some days where eating those fruits and veggies, and I'm not a nutritionist, so like, you know, whatever, antioxidant kind of, you know, those things that are good for our body can be really helpful. At the same time, you know, carbohydrates also do release and can release those positive, those happy brain chemicals like serotonin and dopamine. So there are some days where having that salad might be good self-care for me because I feel good about that choice I made. And then there's other times where, you know what, I just almost like, I just need that quick hit. I need that quick hit of those happy brain chemicals. So I'm going to let myself have those fries with my grilled cheese, and I'm just going to enjoy it. So now I'm going to ask a little bit for the panelists, and if people want to put in the chat of what are some of the challenges with self-care and compassion for folks around us.
I can get us started off. I know for me, the biggest challenge with self-care is the individual, and it's so based on what your needs are. I'm the type of person who like looks to other people to learn about how they take care of themselves, how they learn things in order to try and transfer on that to me. So one thing I know about myself, like taking a bath, probably the worst thing that I can do for my self-care. And when I hear that people take baths for their self-care and really enjoy it, I'm like, good for you. You can have that. It's not going to be for me. And thinking that it's like, am I bad at self-care because baths don't make me feel good? And that's not it at all. It's just not what I need.
Thanks. I think that's a great example.
I find for my challenges, and I talk a lot about this for my students that I teach, is you see such a different, diverse, like on Instagram, you'll see the pretty, the nice, and it kind of gets overwhelming. And in reality, we always just try and teach them that just take one and apply it to your day, apply it to your week, and see if it makes a difference. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. And you acknowledge that and you pick something else that you enjoy. I like exactly what you said, Stefania, you don't like baths, right? And there's running. Oh God, I could not go get up in the morning and enjoy running. That's just not something I do, but I could give it a try maybe in the afternoon and see if it's something that I do enjoy, or change it to what you think will be best for you as well.
Thanks, Morgan.
Yes, I just actually want to add on to Morgan's points here, actually. So I know that Morgan mentioned how, like, you mentioned that sometimes you look towards the next day or something, like, you know, if it doesn't work out, like you think it's just a day, right? You'll have the next day to kind of try again, right? I liked how you mentioned that, because I am trying to myself apply that mindset whenever I try to practice self-care for myself. So right now, my challenge is fitting in my self-care into my schedule. So one of the things I really, really love to do, and that really makes me super happy, is dance, right? So, but the thing is with dance is I have to find a time in my schedule to book a dance class. I have to find the time to travel to the studio, and I have to find the time to just do the dance class and then come back after. So it's a process, I would say. And there are times when obviously work takes over, or other priorities take over, that I don't have the time to do dance. But then I always think there's next week, there's dance class this weekend, there's something the week after. And that's the thing that I really like, the whole mindset that it's just a day, you can take the next day will be better, the next day will be better. So you're always working towards hopefully improving what you can do to continue to practice self-care.
Perfect. And I appreciate that everyone, I have gone rogue since our planning, but what we're talking about is using that self-compassion when addressing self-care. Because if I go to the gym and I'm going to the gym because, I need to make my thighs smaller, they're too big. And I'm spending the whole time being like, oh, I've got my fat thighs. Blah. That's not actually going to make me feel any better. Whereas if I'm going to the gym to feel good, I personally, it has taken a lot of practice. Like, I love my big mama thighs. They're strong, they are powerful, they do things. But I think that's just like a quick example of how, I can go to the gym and celebrate my body. I can go to the gym and be putting myself down the whole time and be like, well, I practice my self-care and I don't feel any better. Of course not. Of course not. And again, hey, whatever you do, and if you're a person who likes running, sometimes it makes me feel good, but I have to go through that really angry stage for a while. So again, it's all figuring out what works for us. And I think also recognizing self-care, you know, in the facial difference community, I think one example I can think of too is makeup, right? There are some people where like celebrating that self-care, that self-compassion is not wearing makeup out. And then there's other people, like, I'll be honest, I did put makeup on. It makes me feel good. I wanted to look good. I even have like a ring light set up for this presentation because I wanted to feel good about how I looked. And I wanted to give myself that self-compassion. And I know that I needed it in the same way that, you know, encouraging other people and saying, hey, you look good. Yeah, I like it when I look good. Also, there are other times where like, I feel good just the way I am in my natural state. So there are lots of different ways that we can practice that self-care and move into practicing that self-compassion. Again, I am giving that disclaimer that, you know, this isn't going to like cure, you know, I think sometimes people think that self-care and self-compassion, you know, can cure anxiety, depression, all of those things. No, it could help. It can build up resilience and protection, but I wouldn't consider it ever to actually be a cure. So just kind of always being aware that, no, this doesn't remove all of the systemic discrimination that there is out there, but it can make me a little more resilient for the next time I face it. Again, and we kind of did touch on this, so is that piece where it's binary. So it's okay, having a bath is good self-care. So if Stefania doesn't like it, then she's bad at self-care, right? It's that binary thinking. You know, making that time, dancing is like good self-care. So if Christine doesn't do it, then she's bad at it, or doesn't make time, isn't able to make time for that entire, you know, class, then, oh, she's failing. So again, it's really thinking of the grays, where sometimes it's also like, well, but I thought about it, or like, I called, I made that step, or I did something today so that I can do it tomorrow, whatever it is. And so I always also just kind of like put in that little note, even though it's not what we're talking about, but self-esteem as well. It's not binary. It's not black and white. It moves, it changes. We might have sometimes where we're really good at self-care, and then, you know, just something happens and we fall behind. And that's when we're really going to learn on some of our self-compassion as well, and being compassionate. And what's neat is like, it's like mindfulness, where even if we fail, so if you're saying, oh man, I messed up, I didn't do, you know, like I didn't do that, you're at least being aware of that judgmental voice in your brain. So it's kind of like, there's no way to fail, which I find really, really interesting. And again, though, if you are having those thoughts, remembering that is a natural state of our brain, is to say, well, it's one or the other, you know, and if other people are giving us that feedback, to remember, okay, that's a natural state of their brain, this problem solving, you know, this is natural, and we sometimes need to work through it. Sometimes even if I don't understand, like if I don't agree with what someone's saying, or if I'm even getting offended, at least it helps me understand where it's coming from. I find like once I learned about the social construction around facial differences, and that we've been taught to be scared of people who look different than us. We've been taught in different movies, you know, scars are the bad, you know, that, you know, it's the bad guy, they have a scar. I found that at least once I caught on to that pattern, I understood that it wasn't personal. It wasn't about me. I can understand people are dealing with what they are being taught around them. Didn't make it totally go away, but it gave me like a little bit of like a sense of understanding. So now we're going to talk about self-compassion. Probably one of the most famous people who talk about self-compassion is Brené Brown. And one of the examples she talks about is, you can't practice compassion with other people if we can't treat ourselves kindly. So the example is, you know, because sometimes we talk about, you know, empathy as, you know, walking in somebody else's shoes and understanding their experience, which, I mean, that's kind of a tough experience. You know, that's kind of a tough example, because there are things that that are outside of my control. And, you know, I know myself, even for looking, you know, at the privilege I experience, You know, being someone who's like cisgendered, who's white, educated, you know, I understand the intersectionality, and I understand that, like, you know, then I have less privilege in kind of my appearance and gender and all of those things. But there are pieces that I can't always understand, you know, I can't always think of that and picture. That's when I've got to listen. And again, these are the times where it's that self-compassion. So it's thinking about, it's almost flipping kind of, I think it's often referred to as that golden rule: treat others as you want to be treated. And it's flipping it. So it's treat yourself the same way you treat someone you love and care about, which is a lot easier said than done. So again, this is the piece where having self-compassion means being able to relate to ourselves in a way that's forgiving, it's accepting, and it's loving, even when situations are less than optimal. So even when we make mistakes, I'm not saying that, you know, if you insulted someone, if, you know, say, like, I have made mistakes, I have used improper terms or insulting, you know, slang, not realizing it. So it's not that I say, oh, well, it's not my fault, or, oh, I messed up, but like, forget about it. It's saying, you know what, I made a mistake, but I'm learning from it. And like, I'm going to move on, and there's good things that I can do to be better next time, versus just being like, you're so stupid, Colleen, you're so stupid, you know better, you're so stupid, right? It's actually saying, yeah, I made a mistake, in the same way that we would tell, you know, a kid, you made a mistake, let's get up, let's be resilient, let's try again, let's do better. So these are kind of the 3 steps. And I apologize, I don't, I think I have her name in another slide, but Dr. Kristen Neff does do a lot of research. And she talks about the 3 things that are needed for self-compassion. And it's that self-kindness. So it's being gentle and understanding rather than harsh and critical. And so the first step is acknowledging that harsh and critical voice. So I am going to use Stefania's example. So the first step, it doesn't have to be that Stefania says, well, I don't care if I don't like baths, right? But it's saying, okay, I'm being critical because I'm feeling like I'm doing something wrong. And so just recognizing that voice. She doesn't have to force herself to like baths. That's not helpful, but it's just understanding, okay, like, and then also stepping back and why am I judging myself right now? Like, why am I judging myself for not booking a dance class? What's going on there? The next piece, and I think this piece is really big in the facial difference community, is it's that it's the recognition of our common humanity. So feeling connected from others and experience in life, rather than being alone and alienated by our suffering. And I think that, you know, I think in this pandemic, there have been times where we have physically been alienated and isolated from others. And so it's reaching out, okay, what, you know, how are there other people? Like, I know one of my practices was calling another friend who I knew lived alone in an apartment, and even just saying, I'm feeling lonely today, and knowing that so the odds were that she was too. And that way I was still acknowledging, I wasn't trying to fix, you know, I wasn't saying, well, I don't need to feel lonely. I was just like, yeah, I'm lonely right now. I know I'm not the only one who's feeling lonely right now. And that's helpful. And I think also this is also talking about, you know, getting connected to that larger community. I know myself, when I got connected to AboutFace and knowing that there were other people with facial differences, it was hugely, hugely powerful. You know, I think sometimes people worry that being a part of one community means that we're losing, like we're losing the connection with the larger group and humanity. And I know these are conversations, you know, I've had with parents too, where it's, well, my child doesn't know that they have a facial difference. And I, you know, and also like, I don't want them to know, you know, I want them to be the same. part of me also, in everyone that I've talked to, is I don't think I've talked to anyone with a facial difference who did not realize that they had a facial difference past 5. That is completely anecdotally. I have not done any research on that, but just based on conversations. But again, it's really that common humanity. And Dr. Neff talks about how, you know, the only time that really identifying with another group, you know, that is part of our self-care and self-compassion. So, you know, she talks about like Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement as being those practices of self-compassion, of mattering. And kind of the only time that like being part of a identified group is a problem is really when we start dehumanizing other groups. That's when things become a problem. So, you know, for me, I find being a part, and I realize I'm preaching to the choir. This is an About Face webinar, so you've probably already recognized that connection and that importance. But again, just reiterating that reaching out, knowing that we're not alone, knowing there are other people out there, actually does increase our self-compassion for ourselves. The next part is mindfulness, which is getting trendier and trendier all the time. I know took a little time to warm up to it, but it turns out that the research shows it actually is quite effective in supporting ourselves and in supporting our own health. And the big piece again of mindfulness is it's not ignoring pain, it's not ignoring any of those pieces, but it's rather becoming aware, and sometimes it's acknowledging. So again, it is that self-compassion. And I think sometimes, you know, we try to remove that pain and suffering from other people we care about, when really it can be more of that mindfulness of, and it's that validation of, you know, like, I hear you're having a hard time. I hear that really hurt you. I hear you're frustrated. You know, what's that feel like? You know, what's that feel like in our bodies? I'm going to talk a little bit more about some different mindfulness practices that we can use. Another piece, this is just a quick little tool. You can Google it. So Dr. Kristen Neff does do a lot of research. And so yes, research is based in colonialism. So there are definitely gaps in some of these pieces. But this can be really helpful if you're kind of wondering, oh, self-compassion? What is self-compassion? Is that something I need, you know, that I could start practicing? And so it's easy to find. I just took a few questions from even like her short formed self-compassion scale. And it's really just recognizing, okay, when I'm feeling down, I tend to think most people are happier than I am, right? I can definitely identify, especially as a teen, right? It just felt like, oh, I'm having a hard time, but everybody else is doing well. And I think on social media, I mean, I don't know how to not feel that on social media when I go on. It's like, oh, everybody else is just doing so much better than I am in life and taking care of themselves. Oh, they're just doing so much better. And I think, you know, one of the lower ones is that I'm disapproving and judgmental about my flaws and inadequacies as well. And I think that goes for our appearance. And I think this is, again, it's a natural state, you know. We always learn it's a lot easier to point out things that we're not happy about ourselves. Often we're taught that that's good. It's good to be humble, right? What are things that we're not so good at? And it's just easier for us to recognize versus bragging about things that are good. So it's really, okay, what's happening, you know, when I am focusing on, you know, my flaws and inadequacy? Like, what's going on? Is that me? Is that coming from another message? Again, the goal is not to make these feelings completely go away, but it's just to recognize kind of where are they coming from, and sometimes acknowledging and sitting with that discomfort before moving on to other things. So the next thing I want to talk about a little bit is positive psychology. And I'll be honest, this is a newer thing for me, I think, because I've always been like, oh, a gratitude journal, what's that going to do? That's not going to fix anything. Turns out, actually, science shows that sometimes it can actually help us train our brains in different ways. But I think the biggest piece is, and you know, like I just picked one image, but there are lots of different stats out there about, okay, how, you know, what determines our happiness? How can we make ourselves happy? And really, like, we don't have a lot of control in what can make us happy. There's so many other factors around us. So that's why sometimes it's like, okay, we're going to control what we can do. So I just learned recently from a training I did with Laurier University is a little bit about practicing and how practicing using positive emotions can actually create this cycle. And I apologize, I thought I had edited my points. I'm going to practice some self-compassion, and like sometimes I make mistakes, and like that's okay. If you're seeing those click to add text, click to add text. But really it's about these cycles. So joy, so something happy, you know, it makes us want to play. And then that makes us want to explore. And then that actually makes us want to enjoy things that are going well and, you know, integrate love and all of these things with safe relationships. So it actually can create this positive cycle. And coming out soon in some different AboutFace resources, we talk a little bit about, you know, how these cycles of positive thoughts can have an influence on ourselves and our well-being. So a good example, and actually I have seen research out there, I remember when it was new research, but I think that was a while ago by Changing Faces, but where they look at, okay, if I feel good about the way I look, then when I go, you know, when I go out there, I'm feeling good. So when I feel, you know, that's why I put like a little bit of eyeliner. That means that I feel good about how I'm presenting myself to whoever's logging onto this webinar. And that means I'm putting more energy into like feeling good about myself. This can be when I'm going, you know, when I'm leaving my house, I'm going shopping or whatever, you know. I walk around, I walk a little taller, you know, I might smile a little more because I'm feeling good, I'm in a good mood. And that means I notice positive feedback from others. You know, that means that when I smile at someone, I notice that they smile back at me. And then that makes me go, oh, isn't everyone good and happy? And then I get to start that cycle all over again. Versus, and there are absolutely days where, oh, I have to go grocery shopping. Wait, I get to go grocery shopping. About that later. But if I'm using another way of thinking, going, oh, I have to go grocery shopping and I don't feel like it, then like I go out and I know like I'm just not feeling good. And that means if someone looks at me or they give me a lingering look, then I'm like, oh, they know I look like crap. I know that's they're looking at me thinking, man, she looks terrible. And then I get back to that cycle of like, I look terrible. And then like, you know, the lower shoulders, all of those different things. So again, not that this is going to cure, because I mean, there are times where I feel good about how I look and I might run into someone in the street who is not nice to me. This might give me a little bit of resilience, but there are times where, yeah, if someone, you know, I can maybe fend off like the first 2 times I feel a negative stare from someone. The third one might get to me, and I'm just going to acknowledge it and practice my self-compassion like that's okay. But just really recognizing that science does show that these cycles can continue. And so why bother? Again, research shows, and I'll be honest, this was the stat where I was like, oh, positive psychology is a we should work on? Okay. And so when people did practice, and there are lots of different things, we're going to talk about a few different examples and kind of similar to how it was discussed. Not all of these are going to work for everyone, but that when people actually did practice positive psychology strategies, there was an increase. There was a 94% increase, which I'll be honest, blew my mind, but to show that there is some power. And again, kind of using that cycle of, you know, when things are good. And I think the best example that actually I've seen is where it's like, Okay, there's like a cute picture of a puppy. Okay, that makes me feel good. That makes me feel happy. So you know what? Like I'm open to like life is good. You know, things are good. Okay, I'm going to do some work. I'm going to get out there and like, oh, the world is a good place. You know, and then like I'm more likely to seek out those good and positive things. So when positive emotions are in ample supply, there's more of it to go around. When positive emotions are in a short supply, that's when we can get stuck. That's where we can get stuck in the like, today is a crappy day. Like maybe if you can't log on to Zoom, you know, today's the worst day ever. I can't do anything right. It's all my fault. And then, you know, I know for me, the more I get frustrated, especially with technology, my brain is not functioning as well. So, you know, I am probably angry. So even if I am typing the correct password, I'm angry. So I'm not really paying attention and I'm just working at a lower and lower capacity and I'm getting stuck and just stuck in that cycle of everything is bad, everything is terrible. Often when I'm stuck in that cycle, it's everybody else's fault. It's not my fault, it's everybody else's fault. So now we're going to talk about a couple examples of positive psychology. You know, there's somewhere it's, you know, practicing, you know, mindful memory. So recall a favorite memory in detail. This can also build into that self-compassion where it's think about a positive memory with someone who cares about you. Or so if you've done something well, it's okay. You know what, like for me, I'm like, what would my grandma Kay say to me? You know, what would she do? Or if I mess up and I have a failure, what would she say to make me feel better? No, she's not here anymore. She's not, you know, we can't have that conversation, but it's kind of, what would she say to make me feel better? So that's also how it can tie into self-compassion. There's the gratitude. So it's one thing I'm grateful for. One thing that happened, and I'll be honest, this was the one where I was always like, nah, that doesn't, to me, I was like, nah, but the research actually does show that in practicing, okay, if we can identify 3 things that are positive in my life, no, it's not going to remove everything that's bad that's ever happened in my life, but it actually does train my brain. I think like after 21 days, something like that, it does train your brain to start looking for the positive more than the negative, which then keeps that cycle going. You know, taking the time, being mindfulness. I'm going to let Morgan explain one of the next things about language because I've been trying to practice it in the last week myself.
So one thing we teach at our employment service is self-care as well. And one key point to it is we talk about language. So, you know, when you have a long day at work and you got to go to the grocery store after, everyone always says, oh, I have to go to the grocery store. Well, change that language. Say instead of have, you get to. So I get to go to the grocery store. I get to do my laundry. I get to wake up in the morning and go to work. That can really have a true change on your positive attitude, I think, especially in the mornings when work may be tough on a Monday morning, comes tomorrow, that I get to go to work or I get to have conversation with my coworkers. That can totally change. Like it says right there, what a wonderful problem to have.
Mm-hmm. And so it's not changing, you don't have to set more time aside. You're just changing that language. And I think that's also, so anecdotally, I know, so I've had it pointed out, what a great problem to have. Oh, I get to problem solve. What a great problem to have. So I have been saying that for probably a decade at this point. So that's something that now comes naturally. Like I think I even did send Stefania an email when I was like, so people are interested in the webinar. What a great problem to have. I get to be nervous. And then like, so I'm comfortable with that. And I'm still practicing I get to be worried about that. How lucky am I that, you know, people are actually going to listen to this. So, you know, personally, I do find these things do take some practice. That going outside, those outdoor time, she says, while recognizing that she hasn't been outside yet today. So I'm going to some self-compassion, that's okay. And then just kind of, you know, inspiration, looking for, so here there's an example, like looking for natural phenomena. I go back, honestly, I go through, if I feel like, those positive feelings are decreasing, I look at pictures of my dog. She's currently with my dad because that was part of his birthday present, was a visit. And I miss her. So like I look up pictures and that gives me a little bit of like, oh, I feel better. Right? Other people like cats, different things, otters. No, it doesn't cure everything, but again, it is practicing and looking for those positive pieces so our brain does get better at recognizing the positive things in life. Again, doesn't work for everyone, but I have been told that people's habits do change after going for walks on me, where they're like, oh, I did not notice how many happy dogs there are until I started going for walks with you. That's what works for me. If you're afraid of dogs, that's not going to work for you. There's different things out there. So just a silly little example. So again, what are some of the benefits? So more positive emotions. Again, this doesn't mean that we're not going to have bad days. It doesn't take away any of those feelings, but it means that there might be a little, more in the bank. I often use the term like filling my bucket, right? So I know that there are bad days, and believe me, I've been feeling there are more bad days than last year than previously. So that means when there's a positive thing, something that makes me feel good, something goes well with a kid I'm working with, I fill my bucket and I hold on to it and I cherish that moment so I can go back and look at it, on those rough days. So it's not removing the rough days, but it's giving a few more resources. The research does show higher life satisfaction. There are slightly reduced depressive symptoms. Again, does not get rid of all of them. Again, that increased resilience, right? That bounce back. Again, it takes practice. So it might not be that quick at first, but it's building up that resilience. It will get quicker. It will get better. That's the way I think about when, I'm working with people around anxiety. My goal is never to remove that anxiety, because that's just not realistic, but instead it's decreasing the power that anxiety has on my brain. So we're shortening kind of those loops. So increased resilience means we're bouncing back just a little bit, or more consistently. Maybe it's not faster. Maybe it's just that we're bouncing back more consistently than we have in the past. And again, that expressing appreciation to others and building those better relationships so that we can keep these cycles of positive emotions going. I really like this quote, is that it turns out that research actually has found that happiness was even more contagious than loneliness or depression. So, I guess kind of like the simplest terms is, we can think of Winnie the Pooh, right? So we can think of like Tigger's bounciness and like happiness, or maybe I think, or Winnie the Pooh's that happiness spreads further. So I'm not saying that like you might not get a little sad when you talk to Eeyore, but that their happiness can go a little further. And there are lots of videos out there. There's lots of examples of how one piece of that positive happiness can be shared with others. And it is, one of my favorite cliches is, if you see someone who needs a smile, give them one of yours, right? Again, to be clear, there are some days I'm not sharing a smile because I don't have one in the bank. But that, it can pass on, where somebody helps someone, holds a door open for someone at the grocery store. That means, someone does that for me. That means I'm more likely to be patient if someone is being slow in front of me, or whatever else is going on. So now we're going to talk a little bit about mindfulness. I am aware of time, so I'd say we've got like 10, 15 more minutes, and then potentially an exercise to follow up for those people who would like to do so. So mindfulness, again, it's really paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally, right? So it's just paying attention. It's not removing any of that pain, it's just noticing it. What's really neat is that it actually is shown to be effective. Here are some of those different stats around less anxiety, less depression, increased well-being, and other impacts on actually like on other physical conditions as well. And what I find really fascinating is that actually, like our brain, there is neuroplasticity in our brain. So in the same way that we can build muscles in our arms, in our big fat thighs, in different parts of our body, we can actually build that resilience in our brain. And so research has shown that consistent mindfulness practice can actually, I think it's grow the amygdala, and the amygdala, sorry, sometimes I use the hand-brain model. This is seeing yourself, that can be very confusing. The amygdala is kind of in the stem of our brain, and that's the part that's kind of like our animal instinct or our lizard brain. So that's the part that reacts to stress, and it's usually fight, flight, or freeze. But it turns out if we practice mindfulness, we can actually grow the capacity in our amygdala so that we are better able to deal with stress, which I just think that's the coolest thing ever, because often, you know, it's like, well, I get stressed, there's nothing I can do about it. And again, not trying to remove stress. Stress is important. Stress keeps us safe. Stress makes us aware of the dangers around us. Stress can also, if you're like me, a deadline can give me that stress to get my work done, right? It can be good, but it's maybe having a little more control in how we respond. So just quick, I think often mindfulness can be confused with just, you know, relaxing and good vibes only and all of those things. You know, meditation, which does work for some people for self-care. I find I struggle with it. So that's when my judgmental brain comes in and says, why aren't you clearing your mind? You can't do this. You're doing this wrong. There's something wrong with you. Instead, what I find is mindfulness actually really guides me. And even what I love about mindfulness is if I hear my little voice saying, you're doing this wrong, I'm being mindful. Like I'm noticing that judgmental voice. So it's really hard to fail at mindfulness, which is one thing I really like about it.
Colleen.
Yeah.
I'm just going to butt in for a second to just kind of give an example of like how mindfulness, self-care, self-compassion, and positive psychology can kind of all come into one. And this is a personal example. After exercise for me is a big part of my self-care. My education background is in kinesiology, so physical activity and exercise for me is like really big and really important. When I was returning to exercise after an illness that I had a couple of years ago, I had to be really realistic with myself, and I had to practice that mindfulness of like, what is my body actually capable of doing in this moment right now? Can it do 15 minutes of exercise today? Yes, okay, we're gonna be compassionate. We're gonna do that 15 minutes of exercise because that's all I can do right now. When previously I probably could have gone on a 10K run and been totally fine. So it's practicing that self-care, that being mindful, like what is it actually that I can be doing right now? And trying something that's challenging that you can accomplish. So those kind of all bundle into the same thing of like stemming from mindfulness, and mindfulness is just being realistic with yourself and your expectations.
Thanks so much. And I think that's a great example. You know, and that actually even like really ties into that initial metaphor that we talked about of the fancy souped up truck versus the rickshaw of, okay, I'm adapting to where I am right now, as opposed to where I used to be or where I want to be, right? It's just, what can I do right now? Thanks so much. Great example. So this is a long list of different ways of being mindful. And what I like about mindfulness is I think that sometimes, and myself included, I can get caught up in like, oh, I need to set aside time to do that. You know, I need to set aside 45 minutes to do a body scan. That is something I have not done since like the first 2 times I did a body scan. That was what a full body scan for 45 minutes. You know, I just, oh, that's too much. So but I can break it down. And whether it's doing a 2-minute exercise, body awareness or breathing exercise, or it can be that I'm not even setting aside time. It's maybe being mindful in how I eat. My favorite mindfulness practice that I got after going for walks with a client is listening to trees sway. That is my new anytime. And now it's become like, even I just thought about it and like my shoulders went back, I relax, and now I do it without having to really, really try. So that ties into what I was practicing with that client was a grounding activity. There are lots of different ways of doing this. And, you know, sometimes it's a guided script, sometimes it's a video, podcast, whatever. So 5 things that you can see. You can, even with little kids, it's turning into I Spy, right? If, you know, sometimes when our animal brain is just going too fast, you know, and I can't fix the problem, because also fixing the problem is not actually going to be helpful. It's just trying to get back to where we can talk and back to where we can see what's going on. So sometimes with kids, it's turning into that I Spy. Oh, what can you tell me around the room? The older that people might get, I might say, okay, describe that to me. Okay, how do I know? Like if I was an alien, how would I know what you're looking at? Or, you know, make it very challenging. Like, okay, you see a tree. Can you see a specific leaf? Okay, what makes one tree different than the other tree? Those sorts of things. 4 things you can hear. For me, I close my eyes. And it can be, it can be, what can I hear in that moment? Sometimes it's also, how far away can I hear something? You know, can I hear anything outside of the room? 3 things you can feel. I usually clarify, because most kids I do the like, what can I feel? What can I move around? And it's, what can I feel right now? Like right now, I can feel the chair I'm sitting in. You know, I can feel the floor beneath me, kind of all of those sorts of things. And then on to smell and taste, which depending on the time of day, it can be a little riskier on those ones. If I don't really want to taste my morning breath or whatever, if it's been a while since I brushed my teeth. But really, that's just a way. And you can do one of those things. Actually, I've been taught by a kid I worked with. They said, we do 3 by 3. So they do 3 things you can see, hear, and feel. And then again, this is the more you practice it. So really, you know, I like supporting people I work with in doing this, because it just makes it easier for me to practice mindfulness on my own, because I practice it so much. But it does mean that now if I go for a walk around trees, I can stop and I notice it a little bit more. I'm a little more intentional. So it has started happening naturally without me having to make a point to say, okay, I'm going to be mindful. Or there are times, like if I'm in a crowded place, I just stop and I take like those 5 seconds, or I can do it while I keep walking. I like that I can do these things and other people don't need to know. So now we do have a visualization exercise. I don't know if there's anything in the chat. Are people okay to keep going for time? Okay, then what I'm going to do is do a quick visualization exercise. This is another mindfulness practice. And, you know, I'll be honest, I wouldn't listen to my voice, but other people can do it. And there's different recordings out there. So it's finding what's out there. So I'm going to be self-compassionate and know that I might not be perfect, but that this is something that can be helpful. So for me, for the people on the panel, if you're able to leave your camera on, thank you. And if it's something where you want to turn off your camera, that's fine. So if everyone can just take a couple of minutes, find a comfortable, quiet place to sit or lie down. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. Take a few slow, smooth breaths. With each breath in, relaxation, breathe out any worries or stress. Let go of all the tension in your body. Allow yourself to slow down. Feel the pace of your heart and lungs become slower. Feel your body sinking more and more deeply into relaxation. Give yourself this time Everything else can wait. Allow yourself to quiet and enjoy that feeling of letting go. Again, take a deep breath in, if you're able to, through your nose and out through your mouth. If you feel your eyelids getting heavy, allow them to close. Now imagine that you are on a long, sandy beach by a bright blue colored ocean. The sky is blue and wide. The waves are gently breaking on the shore. Slowly, the waves retreat back out to the sea, only to be replaced by other waves working their way up the beach and then slowly retreating back out to sea again. With each sound of the waves coming in and going out, you find yourself feeling more and more relaxed and at peace. Far off in the distance, you can hear the faint sound of seagulls. You watch them glide through the sky, gracefully swoop down into the sea, and then fly off again. Puffy, light white clouds very slowly drift across the sky. The sun feels so warm and comforting on your skin. You take a moment to enjoy the warmth on your face. You close your eyes and you take a slow, deep breath. You can smell the salt from the sea. Feel the warm air coming in and out of your body. You feel your body begin to get very heavy. It feels almost as though you are sinking into the warmth of the sand. You feel at ease and content. For a few moments more, let yourself enjoy the sights and sounds of this beautiful day on the beach. The gently breaking of the waves, the smell and taste of the sea, the cries of the birds in the distance, the warmth of the sun on your body. All of these sights, sounds, and smells leave you feeling very calm and relaxed. Let yourself continue to drift. Be aware of how deeply relaxed your mind and body feel right now. Remind yourself that you can create these feelings on your own at any time. Now take a moment to scan through your body. Discover any tensions you are holding, then inhale. Relaxation into that area and exhale the tension. Inhale. Exhale. Come back to this peaceful beach in your mind as often as you like, or create your own place. Let this peaceful place recharge your mind and body. You're welcome to stay here a couple moments longer. And when you are ready, you can gently bring your attention back to the room or the Zoom and returning to the present moment. Take a few more breaths. And if you were there sitting and you found that your mind was wandering, or maybe you're doing this at home and there are other sounds around you distracting you, or you found little thoughts as I was talking and you were trying to picture that beautiful beach, you started thinking about your grocery list and what you need to do before Monday morning. That's okay, because that means you were still practicing that mindfulness. You were aware of what was going on in your mind and body. So you were doing it right. So thanks for giving that a go. That's an example of like a 3-minute task. That, it's not going to fix everything in the world, but you're giving yourself that time in that moment. And then you can say, hey, well done. And again, this is what we are also role modeling for other people in our lives. These are just a few more quick notes. I like to talk about the courage isn't having the strength to go on. It's going on when you don't have the strength. So I think it is using that self-compassion. A lot of times we think, oh, I need to be strong. I can do this. I can beat this. It's me versus the world. And when we go back to self-compassion, it's not. And sometimes it can feel, and I think lots of times, and I think a lot of times, living with a facial difference or caring for someone with a facial difference, it can feel like it is us versus the world. Everyone else wants to hurt us. No one else understands. And so, you know, I think that's where, again, we lean back on that self-compassion, look back on those connection with others and knowing that we're not alone. We're not alone. It can take time to build those connections, but also sometimes even it's looking and seeing, you know, for me, genuinely, like, I'm dating myself, but my first exposure to AboutFace was on a VHS video. And for me, it was really, oh my gosh, there's someone else. They don't look exactly like me. They don't have a hemangioma, but there's someone else who knows what it's like. So again, it's really, you know, it's not about holding up that strength and being able to, you know, always do everything on our own, but it's kind of that courage to try again, to reach out for help, and to practice something new, and to try it again or find something different, you know, like Morgan was saying, where it's like, okay, we're going to try, you know, maybe that doesn't work. Or maybe like running doesn't work for me right now, but maybe I'll, you know, whether it's in the afternoon or for me, like I know I'm not going to run in the winter, but I might be able to run in the spring, or like, you know, run for short times, whatever. And so it's the courage to try things again and move on. So again, here are just kind of some of these things, you know, and this is focused on mindfulness, but it's that piece of mindfulness, and it's that self-compassion, and it's that positive psychology. I'm not expecting you to change every single thing you do in your life and day, because I wouldn't be able to do that. And hey, if you try to do things and then you go, well, I tried to add some positive psychology to my day and it's been 4 days and I forgot about it. All right, that's okay. That's where we do that self-compassion, go, wait, okay, there's judgment there. What's going on? Where's that judgment coming from? What would I say to my friend or a loved one who said that same statement of like, well, I didn't do it for 4 days, so I can't do it ever again. Like, I failed. What would I say? Or what would someone who cares about me? So there's lots of different ways that we can build this into our lives. And again, it's not that I want you to like spend 2 hours a day doing a different practice. I'm just, you know, just hoping that we can maybe kind of retrain our brain a little bit, knowing that it will take time, it will take practice, we will make mistakes. At least that's how I work. Here are just a couple different websites. There's lots of different websites out there for different tools. And I mean, at this point, you know, whatever search engine or whatever social media you use, you know, you can look up self-compassion. You can look up the self-compassion scale. You can look up positive psychology, however you work. If you are a person who needs that evidence, that data, you can look up research articles. If you're someone who's like, I just need like a 30-second lesson, you can try looking it up on like TikTok, Instagram, whatever. There are resources out there. And just, you know, as Stefania said, we maybe can't give you all of the exact tools, but if you're looking for resources, we can help you along the way. And there are lots of things on websites, on the social media for AboutFace. Again, kind of just a reminder that most folks might have at some point been connected to a clinic. You know, as I say that, I'm like, oh, I haven't been connected to a clinic for a couple of years. So it's a little harder. But, you know, for clinics to be considered a member of like the craniofacial societies association out there is access to psychoeducation, to psycho support. So social worker, it has changed over the years. I know when I was a patient at Sick Kids, they had one social worker for the whole craniofacial team, and now I think there's one social worker for like several teams. But there are access to supports out there. And again, this is where it's practicing. So if you don't find someone, give yourself that time, that self-compassion. Maybe you take a break and then you try again. There's a few different websites there as well. And I find, for me personally, I've been putting some of these things into looking for podcasts. And then that's how I've been able to listen and learn a little bit more. Generally, I have to listen to podcasts like 5 times before I retain any information myself. Just a quick little way of talking about our emotional and mental health is, and our self-care and self-compassion is, sometimes we always think about those physical pieces. And I think this is the piece where, this is where the self-care, where it's like, oh, you're feeling fatigued. Well, like, just get out of bed. Like, you're having a hard time, just get up. But we wouldn't tell that to other people who, whether it's like a physical illness or an injury, it's like you're not even trying to unbreak your leg. It's like you're not even trying. I often use the example of sometimes when people are having a hard time, when we are struggling, and we think, well, if they just tried harder, if they just practice more self-care, they'd be okay. Well, not really. If we're having a hard time, if we are dealing with different mental health struggles and issues, then sometimes we need to meet where people are at. And sometimes I think about it of, if I had an injury, if I broke my ankle, I wouldn't say, oh, well, I can just take care of this myself. I can just take care of this myself. I'm going to keep going for those runs and I'll just be fine. It's reaching out for help. So I think those are the pieces of like going out, seeking that support. Not to say, that everyone with a facial difference needs to go see a professional, because absolutely, I think everybody benefits from mental health support, counseling, whatever that looks like, whether you have a facial difference or not, but there still is that stigma. And it still can be hard. So I just like using a silly cartoon to help me make sense of it and share it with other people. But just recognizing that there is support out there and it's figuring out what works for you. Now, opening up for questions and comments. As Stefania said, it would be available in the chats. If there's something that we've missed, if there's something that would be helpful to share with the group. And I think what I might do is I'm going to stop sharing so that I could also see if there are notes. And then you just get to see our faces here. But thanks again for joining. And I think that right now, I think like that even shows that aspect of self-compassion in reaching out, in being connected to other folks out there, whatever that looks like.
If there are no questions or no comments, this is the end of the webinar. So if you have something that you'd like to ask, feel free to stick around. If not, thank you for going above and beyond the time that we have expected or allotted people to stay. So thank you for your participation, and we hope you enjoyed it. You will be receiving an email from us asking for feedback about the webinar. Please do fill that out so it helps us figure out what we are doing well, what we need to work on for future webinars to come.
Thanks so much. Thanks again for everybody's time. I really appreciate it. And well done practicing some self-care and self-compassion.
I'm going to stop the recording here, panelists, if you just want to hang around for a bit. Attendees, thank you for joining.